The snow did not fall so much as it attacked the earth, flung sideways by a merciless wind that howled across the Wyoming mountains. White swallowed the trail, the sky, the trees, even the voices of men and women who once rode together. The storm erased everything, as if the world itself wanted them gone. If you're new here, the voice cuts through the storm low and steady. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The caravan had left Fort Laramie 2 weeks prior. Wagons heavy with coal oil, flour, and rifles meant for the miners up north. But what rode alongside those supplies were quieter burdens: debts, grief, exiles, and secrets. Among them sat Eliza Whitmore, wrapped in a wool cloak, hands trembling not only from the cold, but from the weight of her past. She had once been a teacher, the daughter of a Boston minister who preached civility on Sunday mornings. But civility had little power in the borderlands. Her husband had been shot outside a saloon, not by an outlaw but by another settler. A dispute twisted up in anger at the Lakota, anger at the army, anger at everything. She had buried him with her own hands, frozen soil beneath a cottonwood tree. When whispers began that she was cursed or sympathetic to savages, she sold what little she owned and joined the next supply train north, hoping the storm in her heart might quiet. But the storm outside was louder. The raiders struck just before nightfall, figures on horseback, scarves pulled high over their faces, rifles cracking against the wind. Nobody knew if they were outlaws or renegade scouts, only that they fired without warning. Wagons splintered. Horses screamed. Men and women scattered into the snow, each soul trying to save itself. Eliza ran until the world turned white and soundless. Her boots sank knee-deep in drifts. A branch clawed at her cheek, drawing blood that froze before it could fall. Somewhere behind her came a man's scream, then silence. By the time she stumbled into a clearing, the storm had won. Her legs gave way. She fell, cheek pressed to the ice, breaths coming in ragged clouds that disappeared into nothing. She thought of her mother's voice reciting psalms, of the schoolchildren she once taught to read, of the tiny ring her husband had slid onto her finger with trembling hands. All of it drifted away, like lantern light in fog. Her lips moved in a prayer, though the words broke apart on the wind. Then came the shadow. At first she thought it was a tree moving, swaying against the storm. But the shadow grew, a broad-shouldered figure pushing through the drifts with the patience of a bear. Snow clung to a long coat, to the tangled beard of a man who seemed more carved from stone than born of flesh. He stopped above her, breath clouding the air, eyes narrowed against the gale. For a moment, Eliza feared he was one of the raiders come to finish her. She tried to move, but her limbs betrayed her. The man crouched. His hands, scarred and raw, slid beneath her with a gentleness that did not match his appearance. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. Against his chest she could feel the beat of a steady heart. The storm screamed, but he walked on, step by deliberate step, as though he had done this before. His boots cut deep tracks in the snow, already filling behind him. Her vision blurred, but she caught fragments: the curve of a rifle slung across his back, the smell of smoke and pine on his coat, the heat of his body shielding her from death's frost. Somewhere in the dark, her voice rasped out the only question left in her. "Who are you?" The man said nothing. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed forward, yet the way he held her, not as burden, but as something fragile worth protecting, and told her more than words. And then, as her consciousness flickered like the last ember in a dying fire, she thought she heard a name carried on the storm. The cabin was little more than a shadow against the storm. Logs stacked rough, roof bowed under snow, smoke curling weakly from a stone chimney. Yet to Eliza, half frozen in his arms, it looked like a fortress of light in a world determined to kill her. Elias Kane kicked the door open with his boot and stepped inside, snow gusting in with him before he shouldered it shut. The blizzard roared outside, but within the cabin was silence, the kind that carried old weight, as though the walls had absorbed years of solitude. He laid her gently on a cot near the hearth, where the dying embers glowed faint red. Then he crouched, fed the fire with split pine, and coaxed it back to life. Sparks leapt, wood cracked, and warmth began to seep into the frozen air. Eliza stirred, moaning as the blood returned to her limbs in cruel stings. She forced her eyes open, blinking at the flickering light. The man crouched by the fire, shoulders hunched, coat steaming as it thawed. His profile was sharp. Cheek scarred, beard thick, eyes fixed on the flames as if they held answers. Her voice rasped. "Why, did you help me?" He didn't look up. "Didn't see reason to let you die." His voice was gravel, rough with years of disuse. He stood, fetched a kettle, and set it above the fire. Then, with slow care, he pulled a knife from his belt. Eliza's pulse jumped. She tried to sit upright, but weakness pinned her down. The man noticed her fear and stilled. "Boot," he said simply. She hesitated, then realized frost had frozen the leather to her ankle. His blade worked not at her skin but at the laces, sawing them loose until he slid the boot free. Her sock beneath was stiff with blood and ice. He peeled it away, exposing skin already paling toward frostbite. He frowned. "Lucky, lucky," she whispered, wincing as he wrapped her foot in a strip of cloth torn from his own sleeve. He tied it off gently. Could have lost it. His hands were steady, but she saw the scars etched across them. Burns, cuts, old wounds. A man's history written in his flesh. She wondered what kind of life left such marks. The kettle whistled softly. He poured water into a tin cup, added a pinch of dried leaves, and handed it to her. "Drink." She took it, the tin hot against her palms, the taste bitter but warming as it slid down her throat. "You live here alone?" "Been better years," he said. The silence stretched. Outside, the storm howled, wolves crying faint in the distance. Inside, the fire filled the room with a restless glow, shadows climbing the log walls. Eliza studied him, the set of his jaw, the way he kept his eyes on the fire rather than her. There was restraint in him, but also weight, as though he carried memories too heavy to speak aloud. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I've heard stories of a man in these mountains. Some say he runs with the tribes, others say he kills for coin." Finally, he looked at her. His gaze was steady, hard but not cruel. Stories have a way of outliving truth. Something in his eyes told her he would not explain further. She nodded, understanding the boundary. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. Elias tended the fire, sharpened his knife, moved with the economy of a man long accustomed to silence. Eliza drifted in and out of half-sleep, haunted by flashes of the raid. The gunshots, the screams, the snow swallowing everything. Each time she jolted awake, she found the man still there, sitting near the hearth, as immovable as the mountain itself. At length she said softly, "If you hadn't found me, you'd be gone," he finished for her. Her throat tightened. "Why risk it?" He turned the knife in his hand, catching the firelight. For a moment his face softened, not with warmth but with something older. Regret, maybe. Guilt. "Some debts don't get paid easy," he said. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his eyes had already returned to the flames, and she sensed it was not a story he would give freely. The night deepened. The blizzard raged on, battering the cabin walls, but within the small circle of firelight, life held fast. Eliza shifted beneath the blanket, her body thawing, her mind still taut with caution. She did not trust this man. Not yet. His silence was too heavy, his scars too telling. But in his presence, in the way he'd carried her through death's grip without asking her name or her worth, there was a strange kind of safety. And as the wind screamed outside, she realized she was no longer praying for survival. She was watching him, wondering what kind of man builds a fire for a stranger yet carries a darkness he will not name. The wolves howled again, closer this time. Elias rose, lifted his rifle from the wall, and checked the chamber. He glanced at her once, then back to the door, as though he knew that danger always followed the living, even in the heart of winter. The fire crackled. The shadows lengthened, and Eliza lay awake long after, torn between fear and something else, a fragile thread of trust that frightened her more than the storm itself. The storm did not relent. Each morning the world outside lay buried deeper beneath the snow, trees bent under white weight, mountains veiled, and the trail erased as though no one had ever passed through. Inside the cabin, time slowed. The fire became their sun, the crackle of wood their only clock. Elias moved like a man forged by winters, chopping logs with precise, unhurried strikes, laying snares with quiet confidence, skinning rabbits without wasted motion. Eliza watched him, first with suspicion, then with curiosity. Every act of his survival was deliberate, practiced, and strangely reverent. as though he carried a covenant with the wilderness itself. But he did not keep her idle. "Woodpile won't fill itself," he said one morning, setting an axe in her hands. She blinked, stiff fingers closing around the handle. "I've never..." "Learn," he cut in. His tone was rough but not unkind. Her first swing barely split the bark. The second jarred her arm so hard she gasped. Elias stepped behind her, taking her hands, guiding her stance. His body radiated heat through his coat, steady and unyielding. "Let the weight of it fall," he murmured near her ear. "Don't fight it." She swung again, and this time the wood split clean. She glanced back at him, breath clouding the air between them. For the first time, his expression softened into something close to approval. Day by day, she learned how to snare a rabbit, how to strip its hide, how to mend a cracked pot with resin and twine. Elias did not praise often, but when he did, it landed heavy, anchoring her in a way she hadn't felt since before her husband's death. And in return, she gave him something unexpected: words. At night, when the wind howled like lost souls across the ridges, she spoke of books she once taught from: Shakespeare, the Psalms, the poetry of Longfellow. He listened without reply, but his eyes, reflecting the firelight, gave him away. There was hunger there, not for food, but for the memory of a gentler world. One evening, as snow piled against the cabin door, he finally asked, "Your husband?" "How?" Her breath caught. For a long time, she stared into the flames before answering. "A quarrel in town. A settler claimed he saw my husband trading with a Lakota man. It wasn't true. He'd only mended a wagon wheel for him." But what? Her voice thinned. The shot was in his back. Coward's way. She swallowed, the memory sharp. Afterward, they looked at me like I carried his guilt. Said I was too sympathetic. That I spoke of the Lakota with too much mercy. Silence followed. Elias's jaw tightened. He poured another log onto the fire, sparks jumping. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Mercy ain't a sin, but it'll mark you. Folk'd rather have someone to hate than a truth to swallow." She turned to him. "And what truth marked you?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. His hand tightened around his knife hilt, then slowly loosened. "My family was killed in a raid," he said finally. His voice was steady, but the words dragged from somewhere deep. "By Lakota warriors. I joined the reprisal. Army wanted no survivors, but there were women, children." His gaze fixed on the flames, hard as stone. "I couldn't raise my rifle. Took a few and led them away. Cavalry called it betrayal. Outlaws called it mercy. Been running from both names ever since." Eliza's chest tightened. She saw the scars on his hands, the solitude etched in every movement. She understood now. This man was neither outlaw nor saint, but something between. A man punished for choosing humanity over vengeance. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. Something passed between them, unspoken yet undeniable. Over the days, small gestures grew into threads of connection. He showed her how to whittle a snare stick. She mended a tear in his coat. When her nightmares woke her, his steady presence near the fire steadied her. When his cough racked his chest after hauling wood, she pressed a hand to his shoulder without thinking. They never spoke of it, but in the hush between storm and fire, a forbidden closeness rooted itself. She found herself studying the line of his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. He caught himself listening to her hum old hymns while stirring stew, his heart aching with a memory of voices long gone. One night, when the storm was fiercest, the roof groaned under snow and the firelight painted gold across her face. She looked at him, eyes reflecting both grief and defiance. "The world would spit us out for even sitting here like this," she whispered. His hand tightened around the tin cup. "World's always looking for someone to spit out." Their eyes held. The fire popped, sending sparks upward like tiny stars. Neither moved closer, but the air between them burned all the same. Outside, the wilderness raged, but inside the cabin, two people scarred by loss found, for the first time in years, the faint warmth of belonging, and though neither dared name it, both knew. The thaw had begun. The snow broke at dawn, peeling back the silence of the storm like a veil. The valley glistened under a pale sun, each tree heavy with ice, every branch brittle enough to shatter with a breath. Smoke from Elias's cabin curled upward, thin and stubborn against the blue. Eliza stood at the threshold, the fur shawl Elias had lent her draped across her shoulders. She had grown used to the creak of logs, the hiss of fire, and the quiet cadence of his voice. But now, in the stillness after the storm, there was something else. Hooves, distant at first, then louder. Then many Elias stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing toward the cut in the valley where the sound grew. His jaw clenched. Not just travelers, soldiers. The cavalry came in hard lines of blue and dusted gray, snow crusted on their coats, bayonets glinting beneath the sun. Behind them trailed 2 wagons, not supply carts but cages barred like animal pens. A handful of armed men rode apart from the soldiers, their coats darker, their eyes sharp. Bounty hunters, Eliza's breath snagged. They were here for her, survivors, her caravan. The wreck in the snow? She staggered forward, but Elias's hand caught her arm. "They're not here to save you," he said, low and flat. She turned on him, the fire she thought gone from her chest suddenly alive again. "They're soldiers. They'll take us to town. To safety." Elias's eyes held hers. There was no softness now, only the weathered truth of a man who had outlived illusions. "Look again," and she did. The soldiers' faces were carved from suspicion. The bounty hunters scanned the cabin, the smoke, the footprints in snow. And the cages, not empty. Through the slats, Eliza glimpsed movement. Thin arms, black hair, children, Lakota children. Her stomach dropped. The officer dismounted, boots crunching against the snow. His uniform gleamed beneath the sun, polished brass buckles, saber swaying at his hip. He was young, too young for the cold weight of authority he carried. His eyes swept Elias, then settled on Eliza. "Survivors," he said, almost to himself. "Didn't expect any." Eliza stepped forward, voice breaking. "We were attacked. The caravan, my husband," but the officer's hand rose, silencing her. His gaze cut back to Elias. "You." The air seemed to freeze again, though the storm was gone. Elias Finch. Mountain stray. Accused of harboring hostiles, of treason. The word struck Eliza like a blow. She turned, disbelief flaring. Treason. Elias didn't deny it. His face was stone. The soldiers fanned out, rifles loose in their grip. One of the bounty hunters spat into the snow, smirking. "Figures we'd find you with another stray," he muttered. "Man can't keep from dragging wounded things into his den." Elias's jaw flexed, but he didn't rise to the bait. Eliza's voice trembled, half with fear, half with fury. "What are they talking about?" Elias finally looked at her. His eyes weren't angry, weren't pleading. "Just tired. What they don't tell you," he said low so only she could hear, "is that I was ordered to kill women and children. Burn their camp to ash. I disobeyed. Spared them. For that, I'm branded a renegade." Eliza staggered as though the snow beneath her had given way. The pieces of her grief, her rage, fell into a new pattern, and she hated it. Hated how it made sense. Her husband's death in a clash he never understood. Elias's banishment for mercy. The cycle of vengeance pulling them both under like a river. The officer's voice cut sharp. "By order of the territory, you'll come with us, Finch. Alive if possible. Dead if not." Eliza's throat closed. The world tilted, split between 2 truths. Her husband's blood staining the earth, and the man who had carried her from the blizzard, who had fed her, sheltered her, taught her to split wood, was the same man branded a traitor. Elias laid his rifle down slow, snow hissing as it touched the barrel. "I won't fight you," he said. But the bounty hunter who smirked before stepped closer, eyes crawling over Eliza. "And her? She worth something too. Could be she's consorting with you." Guilt by association. The officer hesitated, too long, long enough to reveal the rot beneath the polish of his buttons. Elias's muscles coiled. Eliza felt it, the storm inside him. She stepped forward before he could. Her voice cut, clear as ice. "My name is Eliza Harper. My husband was killed in your war, your endless war with the tribes. Elias Finch saved me, carried me from the snow when no one else would. If you think you'll put me in a cage, you'll have to kill me first." Silence. A deep, unnatural silence, even the horses stilling their breath. The officer's face hardened. Not mercy, not compassion, but calculation. The bounty hunters chuckled, muttering about wild ones and graves waiting. Elias's eyes, though, flickered with something else. Not surprise, respect, painful respect. The soldiers herded them both to the wagons, rifles steady, boots crunching frost. Elias didn't resist. Eliza didn't beg. But when they passed the cages, her gaze caught the children's eyes. Wide, terrified, cheeks hollowed by hunger. She saw her grief mirrored there, and Elias's truth. Mercy was not treason. Mercy was survival. And in that moment, walking side by side in chains of snow and silence, Eliza knew her story and his were no longer strangers. They were bound. The first bullet cracked through the night like a whip. Snow leapt from the cabin wall in a sharp white spray. Inside, the fire guttered as if the flames themselves had flinched. Elias didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadows shifting beyond the frost-slick window. The wind howled, a wolf circling its prey. The cabin, once a shelter, now felt like a coffin. Eliza pressed her back to the wall, heart pounding not with fear alone but with a fierce, rising defiance. "They've come for you," she whispered. "They've come for us," Elias answered, loading another round. His voice carried no tremor, but his jaw was tight, his breath heavy. "No bounty man leaves a witness. They'll burn this place to the ground if they must." The night came alive with gunfire. Muzzle flashes burst like cruel stars in the tree line. Bullets struck the logs, splinters stinging the air. Elias ducked low, returning fire with sharp, disciplined shots. Eliza's hands trembled as she gathered the spent cartridges. But she did not cower. She placed each casing where he could reach, reloaded his rifles with hands raw from cold, her fingers stiff yet unyielding. Once, she had depended on her husband for everything. Once she had been told a woman's place was behind, quiet, obedient. That life was buried with him in the snow. Tonight she fought. A shadow broke from the tree line. One of the bounty men creeping low with a torch in hand. Elias fired, the man fell, his torch hissing into the drift. Another bullet sliced the air inside, grazing Elias's arm. Blood welled bright against his coat. He hissed, dropping to one knee. "Eliza," he rasped, "bandage." She didn't hesitate. Tearing a strip from her skirt, she pressed the cloth tight, the smell of blood and gunpowder thick between them. Their faces were close, too close, and for an instant, as the world thundered outside, silence pressed in around them. The silence of something unsaid. Then another crack of rifles shattered it. The siege dragged on. Hours stretched like days. Snow piled high against the door. The shutters rattled under the storm of bullets. Elias's breathing grew ragged, but his aim remained steady. Eliza took to the window slit, firing into the night. The recoil jarred her shoulder, but she did not falter. When one attacker charged too close, she threw open the door herself, the blast of her rifle dropping him into the snow. She stood framed in firelight and smoke, her hair wild, cheeks burning with frost and fury. The other man hesitated then, muttering, shaken by the sight of a widow-turned-warrior. Inside, Elias's eyes lingered on her, not as a burden to be carried, not as a fragile thing, but as an equal, forged by storm and blood. Between volleys they spoke in whispers, breaths ragged, words fragile as glass. "They'll never stop," Eliza said, loading shells with blistered fingers. "Neither will we," Elias answered. She looked at him then, truly looked, past the grizzled beard and the scars, past the accusations branded into his name. She saw the man who had carried her from death, who had chosen mercy when the world demanded blood. And she realized, with a sharpness that nearly undid her, that love had already taken root. Not soft, not simple, but fierce, raw, born of survival and sorrow. Near dawn, silence fell. Too sudden, too complete. Elias crouched, rifle ready, eyes narrowing. "They're regrouping," a voice rang out from the tree line. "Finch, Harper, we can wait you out. Snow won't melt, food won't last. Come out and maybe we let you live." Eliza's chest heaved. She met Elias's gaze. "Do we?" He shook his head. "Not while we draw breath." The words bound them together like chain, or vows. The bounty men made their push at sunrise, shadows swarming the cabin, torches raised. Elias fired until his rifle smoked, until each shot cracked like thunder in his chest. Eliza reloaded, passed him weapons, hurled burning logs through the window to scatter the attackers. One burst through the door, blade gleaming, and she met him head on. The struggle was brutal, close, suffocating. His hand closed on her throat, but she drove her knee into his gut, seized Elias's knife from the table, and drove the blade into his shoulder. He roared, staggered back, and Elias's bullet finished him. Her hands shook after, slick with blood not her own. She leaned against the wall, breath ragged, but her eyes did not break. Elias's gaze locked on hers, and for the first time he did not see her as the woman he had rescued. but as the woman who stood beside him in the fire. The last shots rang, the last cries echoed into the dawn. Then, silence again. Bodies lay strewn across the snow, their dark coats stark against the white. Smoke drifted from the chimney, curling into the pale morning sky. Inside, Elias sank to the floor, bleeding, weary, but alive. Eliza knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his wound, her forehead nearly against his. The firelight bathed them both, painting their faces in gold and shadow. Neither spoke the words that burned between them. They didn't need to. The night itself had spoken them, written in smoke, blood, and the refusal to surrender. Outside, the world was still winter, but inside that cabin something had begun to thaw. The cabin went up like a funeral pyre. Flames devoured the logs, crackling and roaring against the pale hush of dawn. Smoke bled into the sky, staining the snow-gray valley with grief and firelight. Elias stood in the doorway one last time, face lit by the blaze, before turning his back and stepping into the frozen world. Behind him, years of solitude burned to ash. Before him stretched the unknown. Eliza followed, clutching the rifle still warm from the siege, her breath ghosting white in the cold. The two of them moved through drifts ankle-deep, leaving tracks that the storm would soon erase. They climbed the ridge slowly, every step an agony of weariness. Elias's wound pulled at him with each stride, but he said nothing. Eliza saw the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his blood darkened the snow in drops he thought she hadn't noticed. She steadied him once, pressing her arm beneath his, her eyes meeting his with a quiet force. "Don't leave me behind," she whispered. His lips pressed thin, eyes shadowed beneath his brow. "I should," he said, the words dragging out of him. "You'd be safer. A woman like you has no place tied to a man hunted in every valley." She stopped in the snow, turning him toward her. Her face was pale, wind-burned, but her gaze carried a steadiness born of nights under fire and mornings that came anyway. "You carried me from death," she said. "I won't walk away from you now." For the first time, his sternness broke. The hardness cracked, if only slightly. They reached the ridge at last. Below, the valley stretched wide and white, the cabin's smoke trailing upward like a final prayer. The storm clouds were breaking apart, and the sun cut through, painting the mountains in gold and fire. Elias drew a long, ragged breath. "No going back," he murmured. Eliza stood beside him, her skirt torn, her hair whipped by the wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Then we go forward." Silence stretched between them, not the silence of fear, nor of strangers, but of something forged and unspoken. He looked at her, the lines of his face etched deep with scars and years, and for the first time, he did not hide what stirred behind his eyes. "Stay with me," he said, voice low. "Even if the world never forgives it." Her hand found his. She did not flinch at the calluses, the scars, the weight of all he had carried. She only closed her fingers around his, firm and steady. "I already chose," she answered. They stood there, two figures against the rising sun, shadows long across the snow. Behind them lay smoke, blood, and a life in ruins. Ahead of them stretched mountains, rivers, dangers untold. But between them was a bond the storm had not broken. The siege had not severed. The fire had not consumed. Elias squeezed her hand once, as if anchoring himself to something he never thought he'd hold again. Then, without another word, they stepped forward. Their footprints trailed into the horizon, swallowed by light and silence until they became only two souls moving toward a future the world would not grant them, but that they had chosen all the same. The wind carried the smoke behind them, but the sun burned brighter still. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from.